Hello, everybody. Well, it's time to read Hiccup, Horrendous Haddock III, How to Train Your Dragon. So I hope you have a reading buddy. I hope you are comfortable with a pillow and a blanket, maybe. Now, we left off Hiccup, Gobber, and the boys were being chased by dragons because fish legs woke them up. And they had to run off the cliff and into the water. Now this water's freezing cold, it's snowing. So Gobber the Belch picked them out of the water, and that's where we ended of chapter 2. Today we're going to read chapters 3 through 5. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here we go. How to Train Your Dragon, Book 1. Heroes or Exile. The boys scrambled over the slimy pebbles at the edge of the beach and back up Madman's Gully, the gorge they had climbed through a couple of hours before. This was a narrow crack in the cliffs filled with large rocks. They tried to move as quickly as they could, but this is difficult when you are slipping and sliding over huge stones covered in ice, and they made painfully slow progress. A dragon that hadn't been put off by the snow came shrieking down into the gorge. He landed on Warty Hog's back and started savaging him, sinking his fangs into Warty Hog's shoulder and ripping red lines into his arms. Gobber bashed the dragon on the nose with the handle of his axe, and the dragon let go and flapped away. But a whole wave of dragons replaced him, pouring into the canyon with awful rasping cries, fire shooting from their nostrils and melting the snow before them. Talons spread wickedly as they swooped downward. Gobber stood, legs wide apart, and whirled his big double-headed axe. He threw back his great heavy head and yelled a terrible primeval yell that echoed down the sides of the gorge and made the hairs on the back of Hiccup's neck stick straight up like the spines on a sea urchin. Here comes the dragons. Individually, dragons tend to have a healthy sense of self-preservation, but they are braver when they hunt in packs. They knew now that they had the advantage of massive numbers, so they didn't check their flying for an instant. They just kept on coming. Gobber let go of the axe. Spinning end to end, the axe soared up to the softly falling snow. It hit the biggest dragon of the lot, killing him instantly, and then kept on going, landing in a snowdrift hundreds of feet away and disappearing. This made the rest of the dragons think a bit. Some of them scrambled over each other in their haste to fly away, yelping like dogs. The others came to a halt, hovering uncertainly, screaming defiance, but keeping their distance. "Waste of a good axe," grunted Gobber. "Keep going, boys. They could come back." Hiccup needed no encouragement to keep going. As soon as he got out of the gorge and onto the marshy land behind it, he broke into a stumbling run, every now and then falling flat on his face in the snow. Sometime later, when Gobber reckoned they were a safe distance from the wild dragon cliff, he yelled at the boys to stop. Very carefully, he counted heads again to check he hadn't lost anybody. Gobber had spent an unpleasant 10 minutes standing at the mouth of the dragon's cave, wondering why they were such a terrible racket and what he was going to say to stoke the vast if he lost his precious son and heir for good. Something tactful and sensitive, he supposed, but tact and sensitivity were not Gobber's strong points, and he took the first 5 minutes to come up with, "Hiccup copped it, sorry," and then spent the second 5 minutes tearing his beard out. Consequently, although secretly mightily relieved, he was not in a good mood, and as soon as he could get his breath back, he exploded all over the place as the boy stood shivering violently in a bedraggled line. "Never in 14 years have I come across such a load of hopeless barnacles as you lot. Which of you useless mollusks was responsible for waking up the dragons?" "I was," said Hiccup. which wasn't strictly true. "Oh, that's brilliant!" bellowed Gobber. "Just brilliant! Our future leader shows off his magnificent leadership skills at the tender age of 10 and a half. He does his best to annihilate himself and the rest of you in a simple military exercise." Snotlout sniggered. "You find something amusing about that, Snowlout?" asked Gobber with dangerous softness. "Everybody's on lipid rations for the next 3 weeks." The boys groaned. "Smart work, Hiccup," sneered Snotlout. "I can't wait to see you in action on the battlefield." "Silence!" yelled Gobber. "This is your initiation, not a day out in the country. Silence, or you'll be lunching on logworms for the rest of your lives." "Now," continued Gobber more calmly, "although that was an absolute mess, it wasn't a total disaster. I presume that you do all have a dragon after that fiasco?" "Yes," chorused the boys. Fishlegs took a sideways glance at Hiccup, who was staring straight ahead. "Lucky for you," said Gobber ominously. "So you have all passed the first part of the dragon test. There are, however, still 2 parts that you have to complete before you can become full members of the tribe. Your next task will be to train this dragon yourself. This will be a test of the force of your personality. You will assert your will over this wild creature and show it who is master. Your dragon will be expected to obey simple commands such as go and stay and hunt fish for you in the way that dragons have hunted for the sons of Thor since anybody can remember. If you are worried about the training process, you should study a book called How to Train Your Dragon by Professor Yaris, which you will find in the fireplace of the Great Hall." Suddenly, Gobber looked very pleased with himself. "I stole that book from the Meathead Public Library myself," he said modestly, regarding his very black fingernails, "from right under the nose of the hairy, scary librarian. He never noticed a thing. And now that's burglary for you." Pretty Hog put up his hand. "What happens if we can't read, sir?" "No boasting, Warty Hog," boomed Gobber. "Get some idiot to read it for you. Your dragons will begin to go back to sleep because this is still their hibernation time." Some of the dragons had indeed gone very quiet inside the baskets. "So take them home and put them in a warm place. They should wake up in the next couple of weeks. You will then have only 4 months to prepare for Initiation Day at the Thor's Day Thursday celebrations and the final part of your test. If on that day you can prove that you have trained your dragon to the satisfaction of myself and other elders of the tribe, you can finally call yourself a hooligan of Burke." The boys stood very tall and tried to look like proper hooligans. "Heroes or exile!" yelled Gobber the Belch. "Heroes or exile!" yelled 8 boys frantically back at him. "Exile," thought Hiccup and Fishlegs sadly. "I hate being a Viking," panted Fishlegs to Hiccup as they stumbled back through the bracken to the hooligan village. You didn't really walk on the island of Burke, you waded through heather or bracken or mud or snow, which clung onto your legs and made them difficult to lift. It was a sort of country where the sea and the land were always falling into one another and getting mixed up. The island was shot through with holes, rowed by the water, a maze of crisscrossing underground streams. You could put your foot on a solid-looking piece of grass and find yourself disappearing up to your thigh in black, sticky mud. You could be making your way through the ferns and suddenly find yourself fording a river waist high and icy cold. The boys were already soaked to the skin with seawater, and now the snow had turned to horizontal driving rain, blowing in their faces with the strength of one of the gale force winds that were always shrieking across the salty wastelands of Burke. A narrow escape from horrible death first thing on Thursday morning, complained Fishlegs, followed by complete rejection by the junior half of the tribe. Nobody's going to talk to me for years after this. Oh, except for you, of course, Hiccup. But then you're just a weirdo like me. Thank you, said Hiccup. And on top of everything, continued Fishlegs bitterly, a 2-mile run carrying a deranged dragon on my back. The basket on Fishlegs' back was plunging wildly from side to side as the dragon inside tried manically to get out, and only a dinner of horrible limpets to look forward to at the end of it. Hiccup agreed that it wasn't a delicious prospect. You can have this dragon back if you like, Hiccup. I warn you, they're filthy heavy when they're wet and angry, said Fishlegs miserably. Gabra's going to go off like a typhoon when he finds out you haven't got a dragon. But I have got one, said Hiccup. Fishlegs stopped and began to take the basket off his back. I know it is yours, really, he sighed wearily. I think I'll just go straight past the village and keep on running till I reach somewhere civilized. Rome, perhaps. I've always wanted to go to Rome, and I haven't got a hope in Valhalla of passing initiation anyway, so no, I've got another one in my basket, Hiccup insisted. Fishleg's jaw dropped open in disbelief. I got it when I went back into the tunnel, explained Hiccup. Well, blister my barnacles, said Fishlegs. How in Thor's name did you know it was there? It was so dark you couldn't see the horns in front of you. It was weird, said Hiccup. I sort of sensed it when we were running down the tunnel. I couldn't see anything, but as we were passing, I just knew there was a dragon there and that it was meant to be my dragon. I was going to ignore it, actually, because we were in a bit of a hurry. But when you said about not having a dragon, and I went back, and there it was, lying on this shelf in the tunnel, just as I'd imagine it would be. Well, Jigger, my jellyfish, said Fishlegs, and the boys started running again. Hiccup was bruised all over, shaking from shock, and he had a nasty dragon wound in his calf, which was stinging like crazy from the salt water. He was freezing cold, and there was an irritating bite of seaweed in one of his sandals. He was also a bit worried because he knew he should not have risked his life trying to get a dragon for Fishlegs. This was not the act of a Viking hero. A Viking hero would know not to intervene between Fishlegs and his fate. On the other hand, Hiccup had been worrying about dragon catching day for longer than he could remember. He had been sure he would be the only one to come back without a dragon, and shame, embarrassment, and awful exile would follow. And now, here he was, a Viking warrior with a dragon. So on the whole, he was feeling fairly pleased with himself. Things were looking up. You know, Hiccup, said Fishlegs a little later as the wooden fortifications of the village appeared on the horizon. That sounds like fate, you sensing the dragon was there like that. This could be meant to be. You could have some sort of wonder dragon in there. Something that makes a monstrous nightmare look like a flying frog. You are the son and heir of Chief Stoic, after all, and it's about time fate came in with a sign about your destiny. The boy stopped, puffing with exhaustion. Oh, I'm sure it's just a commoner garden that wandered away from the rest, said Hiccup, trying to sound careless but unable to keep the excitement out of his voice. He could have something marvelous in there. Maybe old Wrinkly was right. Old Wrinkly was Hiccup's grandfather on his mother's side. He had taken up soothsaying in his old age, and he kept on telling Hiccup how he had looked into the future and that Hiccup was destined for great things. This amazing dragon could be the beginning of his transformation from ordinary old Hiccup, who wasn't particularly good at anything, into a hero of the future. Hiccup took the basket off his back and paused before opening it. It's very still, isn't it? Said Fishleg, suddenly less certain of the fate theory. I mean, it isn't moving at all in there. Are you sure it's alive? It's just very deeply asleep, said Hiccup. It was stone cold when I picked it up. Suddenly, he had a strong feeling that the gods were on his side. He knew that this dragon was alive. With trembling fingers, Hiccup undid the latch, took off the lid of the basket, and peered in. Fishlegs joined him. Things weren't looking so good anymore. There, curled up fast asleep in the bottom of the basket, in a tangled dragon knot, lay perhaps the most common or garden dragon Hiccup had ever seen. The most extraordinary thing about this dragon was how small it was. Well, I like to say, all good things come in a small package. Absolutely, the only extraordinary thing about this dragon was how extraordinary small it was. In this, it was truly extraordinary. Most dragons that the Vikings used for hunting purposes were about the size of a Labrador retriever. The adolescent dragons the boys were collecting weren't quite that big, but they were nearly fully grown. This dragon was more comparable to a West Highland Terrier. Hiccup couldn't think how he had overlooked this when he picked the dragon up in the tunnel. He supposed miserably that it was rather a pressured moment. What with 3,000 dragons trying to kill him at the time, and dragons in a deep sleep coma do tend to weigh more than they do when they're awake. Well, said Hiccup at last, that's a sign, if you like. You reach for a deadly natter, and what do you get? A basic brown. I grab a dragon in the dark, and what do I get? A common or garden. The thing is, the gods are telling us we're common or garden folk, Fishlegs. You and I, we're not meant to be heroes. It doesn't matter about me, said Fishlegs, but you are meant to be a hero. Remember, son of the chief and all that? And you will be one. I know you will. Fishlegs put the basket back on Hiccup's back, and they trudged toward the village gates together. At least I sincerely hope you will. I don't want to be following Snotlout into battle. You've got more ideas about military tactics in your little finger than Snotlout has in his whole fat head. Well, that may have been true. Not only was Hiccup not about to be the future star of dragon training, but with this particular dragon, it was even going to be difficult for him to take his familiar place fading into the background. It was so small, it was going to make him look ridiculous. It was so small that Snotlout was going to have some very unpleasant things to say about it. Chapter 4. How to train your dragon. Ha 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 ha! Snotlout was laughing so hard that he hadn't managed to say anything at all. The boys were hanging about the village gates, taking the opportunity to show off the dragons that they had caught. Hiccup had tried to walk through without being noticed, but Snotlout had stopped him. Let's see what pathetic creature Hiccup has got, said Snotlout, and took off the lid. Oh, this is brilliant! Look at it, said Snotlout when he finally got his breath back from laughing. What is it, Hiccup? A brown bunny rabbit with wings? A flower fairy? A fluffy flying frog? Gather around, everybody, and see the magnificent animal that our future leader has caught himself. Oh, Hiccup, you are useless, cried his Speedfist. You're the son of a chief, for Thor's sake. Why didn't you get one of those new monstrous nightmares with the 6-foot wingspan and extendable claws? They're really mean killers, they are. I have one, grinned Snotlout, gesturing to the terrifying-looking flame-red animal fast asleep in his basket. I think I shall call her Fireworm. What are you going to call yours, Hiccup? Sweetums, Sugar Lips. baby face. Hiccup's dragon took this particular moment to give a huge yawn, opening his tiny mouth wide to reveal a flickering forked tongue, very pink gums, and absolutely no teeth at all. Snotlout laughed so hard, Speedy Fast had to hold him upright. Toothless! Cried Snotlout. Hiccup has found himself the only toothless dragon in uncivilized world. This is too good. Hiccup the useless and his dragon toothless. Fishlegs leapt to Hiccup's defense. Well, you are not allowed that monstrous nightmare that you've got there, snot-faced Snotlout. Only the son of a chief is allowed a monstrous nightmare. That fireworm dragon is Hiccup's by right. Snotlout's eyes narrowed. He grabbed Fishleg's arm and twisted it viciously behind his back. Nobody's listening to you, you plank-hearted fish-leg disaster area, sneered Snotlout. Thanks to you and your sniveling, sneezing disability, that whole military operation was nearly a total disaster. When I'm chief of this tribe, the first thing I'm going to do is boot anybody with a pathetic allergy like yours straight out into exile. You're not fit to be a hooligan. Fishlegs went very white in the face, but he still managed to gas out, but you're not going to be chief of this tribe. Hiccup is going to be chief of this tribe. Snotlout dropped Fishleg's arm and advanced menacingly on Hiccup. Oh, he is? Is he? Jeered Snotlout. So I'm not allowed that monstrous nightmare, am I? Our future leader is going very quiet about it, isn't he? Come on, Hiccup. I'm stealing your inheritance. What are you going to do about it then, huh? The boys all looked solemn. Snotlout really had broken an ancient Viking rule. Hiccup should challenge you for the dragon, said Fishleg slowly, and everybody swiveled around to look expectantly at Hiccup. Oh, brilliant, muttered Hiccup under his breath. Thank you, Fishlegs. My day just gets better and better. Snotlout was a great brute of a boy who didn't really need Dogsworth's help when it came to bashing people up. He wore specially constructed bronze-tipped sandals in order to cause maximum damage when kicking people. Hiccup tried to stay out of his way as much as he possibly could. But he couldn't ignore this insult in his status now that Fishlegs had helpfully pointed it out without looking like a coward in front of the other boys. And if you become known as a coward in the hooligan tribe, you might as well go the whole hog and wear a pale pink jerkin, take up playing the harp, and change your name to Ermintrude. I challenge you, snot-faced Snotlout, for the dragon fireworm, who is mine by right, said Hiccup, trying to hide his reluctance by speaking as loudly and firmly as he could. I accept your challenge, said Snotlout, super fast, grinning all over his horrid, smug face. Axes or fists? Fists, said Hiccup, because axes were really bad idea. I shall look forward to showing you how a real future hero fights, said Snotlout. And then he remembered something. After the initiation thing on Thursday, though, I don't want to stub my toe or anything while I'm kicking you all around the village. Hiccup might win, Fishlegs pointed out. Of course he won't win, boasted Snotlout. Look at my sporting ability, my Viking courage, my capacity for mindless violence. I shall win just as surely as I shall be chief of this tribe one day. I mean, look at my dragon and then look at his dragon. He pointed mockingly at Toothless. The gods have spoken. It's only a matter of time. In the meantime, Snotlout carried on, I shall live in fear of being gummed to death by Hiccup's terrifying, toothless terrapin. And Snout sauntered off in a lordly fashion, giving Hiccup a nasty kick on the shins as he did so. Sorry about the challenge, Fishlegs apologized after they had left the baskets with the dragons in them under their beds at their homes. Oh, don't worry about it, said Hiccup. Somebody would have gotten me to do it anyway. You know how they all love a fight. Fishlegs and Hiccup were going to the Great Hall to look for the book Gobber had recommended, How to Train Your Dragon by Professor Yobbish. As it happens, confided Hiccup, I know a bit about dragons already, but I haven't the foggiest clue how to start training one. I would have said they were virtually untrainable. I'm really looking forward to getting some tips. The Great Hall was a hullabaloo of young barbarians fighting, yelling, and playing the popular Viking game of basketball, which was a very violent contact sport with lots of contact and very few rules. Hiccup and Fishlegs found the book tucked away in the fireplace, practically in the fire. Hiccup had never noticed it before. He opened the book. I have included a basic replica of How to Train Your Dragon by Professor Yobbish here in order that you can share the experience with Hiccup of opening that book for the first time, full of hope and interest and expectation. You'll have to imagine that the cover is usually thick with huge golden clasps and that some scribe has covered it in elaborately fancy gilt lettering. It looks very inviting indeed. How to Train Your Dragon by Professor Yarbish. B.A., M.A. Hans, Ketebag, etc. Big Axe Books, 10th Anniversary Edition. Winner of the Best Book for Barbarians Gold Award. Barbaric book. This book is dedicated to Mommy with love from your dearest Yob. Copyright Professor Yobbish, Dark Ages. The publisher, Big Axe Books, would like to point out that they take no responsibility whatsoever for any injuries that may occur as a result of any person or persons following the advice given in this book. Thank you for your attention. Beowulf is a softie. Come here and say that. Meathead Public Library. A note from the Harry Scary Librarian. Please return this book on or before the last date stamped, or I will be very annoyed. I think you know what I mean. All the steps. 780, 980, 83580, 866. Do not remove this book or we will bash you. My dad, Tuffet, harder, tougher than you. No way. My dad could have your dad for breakfast. My dad is tougher than your dad. No way. Your dad could have my dad for breakfast. Ah, yes. Warriors indeed. Oops. About the author, Professor Yobbish, B.A., M.A. Hans, Tab, etc., has spent many years in the wild observing dragons in their natural habitat. This book is the culmination of his research, and it is the definite textbook on the subject of these fascinating creatures. Professor Yobbish lives alone in a cave on the Isle of Doom. He is the author of Looking After Your Killer Whale and Sharks and Other Great Pets. He is currently writing a book about butterflies. Chapter the first and the last. The golden rule of dragon training is to yell at it. The louder, the better. The end. How would you train a dragon? Look inside for all the answers in Professor Yabish's hugely entertaining and informative book. Follow his simple advice, and you will soon be on your way to becoming the hero you've always wanted to be. Praise for How to Train Your Dragon. This book changed my life. Squid Face the Terrible. A brilliant book. The Meathead Monthly. Nobody yells better than Professor Yabish. This is a sensitive and well-researched book that contains all the information you need to turn your dragon into a pussycat. The Hooligan Observer. Yabish is a genius. The Viking Times. Price, 1 smallish chicken, 20 oysters. That's it? Said Hiccup fiercely, turning the book upside down and shaking it, trying to see whether there was anything other than the simple page of paper inside it. Hiccup put the book down. His face was usually grim. Okay, fish legs, he said, unless you're any better at yelling than I am, we're on our own. We're going to have to work out our own method of dragon training. Chapter 5, A Chat with Old Wrinkly. This is Stoic the Vast. The next morning, Hiccup checked the dragon under his bed. It was still asleep. When his mother, Valarama, asked him at breakfast, How did initiation go yesterday, dear? Hiccup said, Oh, it was fine. I caught my dragon. That's nice, dear, Balarama replied vaguely. Stoke the Vast looked up briefly from his bowl and boomed, Excellent! Excellent! Before getting back to the important task of shoveling food into his mouth. After breakfast, Hiccup went to sit on the front step beside his grandfather, who was smoking a pipe. It was a beautiful, cold, clear winter's morning with not a breath of wind and the sea all around as flat as glass. Old Wrinkly blew out smoke rings contentedly as he watched the sun coming up. Hiccup shivered and chucked stones into the bracken. Neither of them spoke for a long time. At last, Hiccup said, I got that dragon. I said you would, didn't I? Replied Old Wrinkly. Very pleased with himself. Old Wrinkly had taken up soothsaying in his old age, mostly unsuccessfully. Looking into the future is a complicated business, so he was particularly pleased that he'd gotten this right. Something extraordinary, you said, complained Hiccup. A truly unusual dragon, you said. An animal that would really make me stand out in the crowd. Absolutely, agreed Old Wrinkly. The entrails were undeniable. The only extraordinary thing about this dragon, continued Hiccup, is how extraordinarily small it is. And that it is super unusual and even more of a laughingstock than ever. Oh, dear, said Old Wrinkly, chuckling in a wheezy way over his pipe. Hiccup looked at him reproachfully. Old Wrinkly hurriedly turned the laugh into a cough. Size is all relative, Hiccup, said Old Wrinkly. All of these dragons super small compared to a real sea dragon. A real sea dragon is 50 times as big as that little creature. A real sea dragon from the bottom of the ocean can swallow 10 large Viking ships in one gulp and not even notice. A real sea dragon is a cruel, careless mystery like the mighty ocean itself. One moment calm as a scallop, the next raging like an octopus. Well, here on Burke, said Hiccup, where we haven't any sea dragons to compare anything with, my dragon is just considerably smaller than everybody else's. You're getting off the point. Am I? Asked Old Wrinkly. The point is, I just don't see how I am ever going to become a hero, said Hiccup gloomily. I am the least heroic boy in the whole hooligan tribe. Ah, this is ridiculous, tribe, fumed Old Wrinkly. Okay, so you're not what we call a born hero.
You're not big and tough and charismatic like Snotlout, but you're just going to have to work at it. You're going to have to learn how to be a hero the hard way. Anyway, said Old Wrinkly, it might be just what this tribe needs, a change in leadership style. Because the thing is, times are changing. We can't get away with being bigger and more violent than everybody else anymore. Imagination. That's what they need and what you got. A hero of the future is going to have to be clever and cunning, not just a big lump with overdeveloped muscles. He's going to have to stop everyone quarreling among themselves and get them to face the enemy together. How am I going to persuade anybody to do anything? Asked Hiccup. They've started calling me Hiccup the Useless. That is not a great name for a military leader. You have to see the bigger picture, Hiccup, continued Old Wrinkly, ignoring him. You're called a few names. You're not a natural at basketball. Who cares? These are very little problems in the grand scheme of things. It's all very well for you to say they are little problems, said Hiccup crossly, but I have a lot of little problems. I have to train the super small dragon in time for Thursday, or be thrown out of the hairy hooligan tribe forever. Ah, yes, said Old Wrinkly thoughtfully. There's a book on this subject, isn't there? Remind me, how does the great professor of Meathead University think you should train a dragon? He thinks you should yell at it, said Hiccup gloomily, chucking stones again. Show the beast who is mastered by the sheer charismatic force of your personality, that sort of thing. I have about as much charisma as a stranded jellyfish. Yelling is just another thing I am useless at. Yes, said Old Wrinkly, but maybe you'll have to train your dragon the hard way. You know a very great deal about dragons, don't you, Hiccup? All that dragon watching you've been doing over the years? That's a secret, said Hiccup uncomfortably. I've seen you talking to them, said Old Wrinkly. That's not true, protested Hiccup, going bright red in the face. Okay, then, soothed Old Wrinkly, calmly smoking his pipe. It's not true. There was silence for a bit. It is true, admitted Hiccup. But for Thor's sake, don't tell anybody. They wouldn't understand. Talking to dragons is a highly unusual skill, said Old Wrinkly. Maybe, he said, you can train a dragon better by talking to it than by yelling at it. That's sweet, said Hiccup, and very touching thought. However, a dragon is not a fluffy creature like a dog or a cat or a pony. A dragon is not going to do what you say just because you ask it pretty please. From what I know about dragons, said Hiccup, I should say that yelling was a pretty good method. But it has its limitations, doesn't it? Old Wrinkly pointed out. I would say that yelling was highly effective on any dragon smaller than a sea lion, and positively suicidal if you try it on anything larger. Why don't you come up with some alternative training schemes yourself? You might be able to add something to Professor Yabash's book. I've often thought that that book needs a little something extra. I can't quite put my finger on it. Words, said Hiccup. That book needs a lot more words. Okay, so that's where we're going to end. Chapter 6 is Meanwhile Deep in the Ocean. So next Friday, you'll get chapter 6 through whatever I choose. All right, bye, guys.